Yeah, and you touched on something else that I think is worth looking into a bit more, but the sort of performance of underwriters. A lot of times, you have a CUO or you have individual sort of lead underwriters or head underwriters for a specific class of business or product. And a lot of times their performance is getting measured on how profitable is that book of business. But as you sort of touched on, that can be quite variable. And if they get a bad cat year, the loss ratio or the combined ratio is huge, but they could also avoid a cat and have a really profitable book of business for 10 years in a row based more on luck. So have you seen sort of the remuneration model in our industry sort of aligning with the combined ratio of those underwriters?
I think, one of the things I wanted to introduce to that actually as an extra layer is short tail versus long tail as well.
Yeah.
Because to your point, we have things like catastrophe underwriters who are judged on the performance, over a very long schedule, but kind of based on luck. It's quite hard to prove that you were a brilliant underwriter or a terrible underwriter based on whether a hurricane happened or not, because chances are you're going to get exposed to it in some way. I am always impressed by those underwriters that are able to, I guess, loss pick and choose very specifically which accounts and which layers within those accounts. So when I say accounts, I mean clients effectively. Mm-hmm. So, you're going to take the first, a big chunk of the first layer and not too much of the upper layers of this regional US client. I'm going to take only the upper layers, or as much as I can of the upper layers, but avoid the attritional layers of this nationwide account. Whatever your strategy might be, but seeing how, when, not if, but when the market gets hit by a big event, how did your portfolio on the reinsurance side perform versus other underwriters writing a similar portfolio? I think that's where the underwriters start to differentiate themselves. But on the long tail side, you're waiting a really, really long time to find out whether or not your underwriting has been effective or not. I don't know if you can explain that.
Well, I wanted to touch on, so for the people who aren't as familiar with the industry, the difference between short and long tail. So a very common short tail class would be property. Like at the end of the year, did this home burn down or not? Very yes or no. But in casualty, one of the long tail classes, it extends out a much longer time. So, was workplace conditions unhealthy so that 4 or 5 years later, someone has an asthmatic issue or asbestosis or something that was quite common, a big claim that the industry had, where 7-8 years later you're saying, well, the time I spent working here exposed me to this issue, and therefore I'm making a claim which insurance will pay for, but we're talking several years from the point by which you were exposed to something. But you're right, in that scenario, it's much more difficult for an underwriter to say, this year I didn't write anything that was exposed to asbestos, therefore I'm a great underwriter, when we don't know that asbestosis is a thing for 10 more years, right? So it's harder to sort of present the case that you're a really good underwriter, where in the property example, you say, I chose to write in these geographies at these different layers and levels. One sort of cat event happened and we avoided it because of my genius underwriting, and this other one didn't happen and therefore also we're geniuses, and the profitability is really, really high. But you can have an assessment of that at the end of every year, or at the end of whenever you draw the line in the sand for that year being done. And casualty or long tail business more generally doesn't have such a clear line of sight for that.
Absolutely. So hopefully now, having listened to all that, and I understand if you need to get back to the beginning and listen to some of that again, you now will look at a news press release about such and such an underwriter releases its annual results with a bit more nous and skepticism. When you see those numbers coming in, or people trying to spin a combined ratio as a brilliant result, etc., you'll be able to look at that and really interrogate it. Yeah. But
and get a bit of insight into, if you're seeing combined ratios for several years in a row over 100, a bit of reason why that company isn't out of business, perhaps, right? There's more happening there.
Absolutely.